You are sitting here, reading this, breathing, heart beating. You exist. But think about this for just 1 second. If tomorrow, almost every human on Earth disappeared, how many people would need to survive? For humanity to not go extinct? Not a philosophical question, not science fiction. This is a question that real scientists have actually sat down and calculated. And the number they came up with is smaller than you think. Much smaller. Small enough to be terrifying. Let us start at exactly the point most people miss when they imagine the end of the world. What do you think the biggest problem would be after a catastrophe like that? Food? Water? Weapons? Shelter? Wrong. The biggest problem would not be out there. It would be inside your body. Inside every single cell. Inside the DNA you inherited from your parents, your grandparents, and ancestors whose names you will never know. That problem has a name. Scientists call it recessive genes. And this is something every single one of us is carrying right now, without knowing it. Every human being on this planet, including you, statistically, has a high chance of carrying at least one recessive gene for a deadly disease. You are fine, because you only have one copy of that gene. One copy is harmless. Recessive genes operate on a brutally simple mechanic. You need 2 copies of the same bad gene for the disease to actually activate. 1 copy from your mother. 1 copy from your father. When that happens, you are genetically programmed to develop that disease from the moment you are born. And here is where the math becomes frightening. The smaller the surviving population is, the smaller the shared gene pool becomes. Imagine the gene pool as a deck of cards. Normally, you have 8 billion people. 8 billion different decks. The odds of 2 random people meeting and carrying the exact same bad gene. Low. Very low. But what if a catastrophe strikes and only a few hundred people are left? Now you have only a few hundred decks. The odds of 2 people carrying the same bad gene and having children together skyrocket. Their children are born with more genetic diseases, weaker, less able to reproduce. And the spiral goes downward until humanity no longer has the biological strength to survive. This is not something I made up. This is what 2 separate groups of scientists have spent their entire careers studying. Group 1, researchers who study endangered species on the brink of extinction. Group 2, scientists planning for human settlement in outer space. 2 fields that seem to have nothing to do with each other, but they are solving the exact same core problem. What is the minimum number of individuals a species needs to avoid genetic collapse? And their answers, both reassuring and deeply unsettling at the same time, will change the way you look at humanity. Let us start with the largest number. Scientists planning space colonies, the people who actually sit down and calculate how many humans you would need to build a new civilization on another planet, have landed on a figure of around 14,000 people. 14,000. That is roughly the population of London in the 11th century. Not modern London with its 10 million people. London 1,000 years ago, a small town by today's standards. Why so many? Because 14,000 people are not just enough to preserve genetic diversity. They are enough to keep the knowledge of civilization alive. You need doctors, engineers, farmers, builders, people who know how to filter water, people who know how to deliver a baby, people who know how to treat a wound, people who know how to construct a shelter that will not collapse. 14,000 people to preserve both the genome and the civilization. But what if we are only talking about pure biological survival? Forget civilization, forget technology, just the species, not going extinct. The number drops to around 5,000 people. 5,000, about the size of a mid-sized university campus. About the number of people who fit inside a small sports stadium. 5,000 people. And humanity can continue. But history tells us something even more staggering. Around 800,000 years ago, your direct ancestors actually survived with far fewer than that. In 2023, a landmark study was published in the journal Science by a team of researchers led by Dr. Wang Jiehu at Fudan University in China. They analyzed the DNA of hundreds of people from diverse ethnic groups across the entire world. They did not use fossils. They used the living DNA of people alive today as a time machine. And that time machine revealed something terrifying. somewhere between 800,000 and 900,000 years ago. The ancestral population of modern humans suddenly collapsed from roughly 100,000 individuals down to fewer than 1,300 breeding individuals. 1,300 people to keep going. To create the 8 billion people living on Earth right now, you are sitting here, reading these words, and every drop of blood in your body traces back to a group no larger than the students of 2 or 3 high schools combined. How did they do it? Researchers believe that groups survived because they still had enough genetic diversity between them, not because of how many they were, but because the bad genes inside that group were fortunately different enough from each other, not overlapping enough to drag the whole group down. This was the decisive factor for survival, not quantity, but the quality and variety of the genes in that group. And that brings us to the next number. The number that, when I say it, you might not believe. If humanity were smart enough to prepare before a catastrophe struck, if we carefully selected the survivors, then the minimum number needed to keep our species genetically viable could drop as low as 150 to 500 people. 150 to 500. That is about the number of passengers on a single mid-size commercial airplane. You could stand at an airport gate and see every single person humanity would need to start over. And the whole species could begin again from that. But this is the point where science starts touching questions that have no clean answers. If the surviving population drops to that level, you cannot allow people to choose their partners based on emotion anymore. You cannot. Because if you and the person you love happen to carry the same bad gene, your child will receive 2 copies of that gene, and that child will be born to suffer a disease they never chose. Scientists, particularly those working in the field known as minimum viable population theory, which is essentially the study of how small a group can get before a species collapses irreversibly, have proposed that in this scenario, couples would have to be matched based on genetic distance, meaning you would be assigned to reproduce with whoever is most genetically unlike you. Not the person you are attracted to, not the person you choose, but the person a computer or a panel of scientists determines will produce the healthiest offspring. Sounds like a dystopian science fiction plot. But this is exactly how zoos currently run breeding programs for endangered species. Let us talk about the black-footed ferret, one of the most endangered mammals in North America. In the 1980s, scientists discovered that the wild population had collapsed to 24 individuals, 24 ferrets, for the entire species. Conservation specialists brought all 24 into captivity. They built a tightly controlled breeding program. Every pairing was matched by genetic data, no choosing their own partners. And today, after several decades, the black-footed ferret population has recovered to thousands of individuals. From 24 individuals. Humanity could learn from that. But this is where the story gets truly mind-bending. Because the next question scientists actually dared to ask was this. Could we start over with just one person? One single human survivor after the end of the world? The answer is, theoretically, yes. But only if we prepared in advance. Here is the scenario that, in theory, actually works. Before the catastrophe happens, humanity builds a massive bank of frozen, fertilized embryos. Not a sperm bank, not an egg bank, but a bank of already fertilized embryos. From thousands of different couples, representing the maximum possible genetic diversity of the human species. The sole survivor, whether male or female, would carry those embryos to term. Or, if male, the technology of artificial wombs would be required. Each child born would carry the genome of people who had already perished, the genetic diversity of all of humanity, compressed into frozen tubes, handed forward to the next generation. And if that happened, researchers estimate it would take only around 420 years to bring the human population back to its current level. 420 years. That sounds like a long time, but consider this. 420 years ago from right now was 1,604. Shakespeare was still alive. Galileo was just beginning his astronomical work. The United States did not exist yet. And in that same span of time, humanity went from no United States to smartphones in every pocket. 420 years. And the human race could be reborn from a single person. One person. Now stop and think about this. 800,000 years ago, 1,300 of your ancestors stood at the edge of extinction. They did not know that. They had no science, no computers, No conservation programs. Nothing. They just lived, hunted, raised their children, got through each day, and somehow they made it. Their genes flow through you. Your genes. Everything you are. Your memories, your emotions, your capacity to love and to think are the inheritance of a survival story so extraordinary that you did not even know you were living it. And the final thing I want you to carry away after reading all of this is not fear of the apocalypse. It is this. Every person you encounter today, the stranger on the bus, the vendor on the street corner, the coworker who sometimes gets on your nerves, is a piece of the genetic library that humanity needs to survive. Our diversity is not a weakness. It is our species' biological insurance policy. You are sitting here, breathing, heart beating, and you exist. Because 1,300 people from 800,000 years ago did not give up. Do not give up.